we've got a well-rounded panel with a lot of experience. So we're going to move straight into cybersecurity and the SMB here. I know everyone that signed up for this session, we have a group that you obviously take your cybersecurity seriously. So I am not wanting to preach to the choir here today, but I did want to give you guys a quick view at what is important to know about the risks and what can really happen to small and medium-sized businesses if they have a data breach, if they have a cyber attack. So just a quick video from one of our partners, Datto, to talk about what real world impacts not having all of these things in place can have on a business. And when we talk about real world examples, we obviously have seen some of those from this panel has at least. So Peter, do you have a story or an example of a business that did experience one of these attacks, and what does that look like? If you could give us a quick overview of a real world example.
The one that comes to mind is a small family-owned business that was up in mid-Michigan. They manufacture or not manufacture, but they produce sausage and some cheeses up here. Really good family, wholehearted people. And their firewall was not configured properly. It allowed remote access from the outside over remote desktop. It's one of the biggest vulnerabilities when you configure a firewall. Well, the attacker used what's called a brute force attack. So they tried password after password until they got onto their server, and then they installed ransomware. And so it took all of the files on their server and it made them unusable. So I was contacted after this had happened and had to come in and work with them. They had a choice. Their backups were even encrypted, so they were unusable backups as well. So the only way to get their data back, and this is not what I suggest, was to pay the ransom. Without that, they wouldn't have had any of their inventory. They wouldn't have had any of their accounts receivable. They wouldn't even know how to do payroll unless they got those files back. So they opted to pay the ransom, which took 2 weeks of a process to go through before we even got acknowledgement that they were willing to pay. So at the end of it all, they did get their data back, but it's very rare. A lot of times you don't get your data back even if you pay the ransom. And so the ransom that they were asked to pay initially was $30,000, which is a lot for a small business. In this case, they were able to talk the ransom people down to $6,000, and they were able to get their data back. But it's horrific. It can take a business and put it right at its knees. And this is happening every day. The stats out there are real, and we're seeing this on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think if nothing else from this current situation, this time that we're in, we're really seeing how important local businesses are for our communities. And so seeing a great family business, especially one that it sounds like they were trying to do a lot of the right things, and there was just that one loophole or one area, that weak spot that somebody was able to find. And that's exactly why we wanted to have this meeting today, because things like that remote workforce put you at a greater vulnerability than where you may have been before everything today. Did anybody else have another story they wanted to share? Sean, I think you had something about maybe a little bit local for a lot of our attendees.
Yeah, we had a local municipality here in the Memphis area that was impacted by a ransomware attack back in mid-2019. We attacked a large portion of that local government down as their servers and data were being recovered. Took their team about a week to recover everything from the attack and get the city running back to capacity. They did not pay the ransom that was being requested. Although they were able to get the servers back online, there was a significant data loss involved that impacted records back to about 2017 in some of their systems. The estimated attack cost for the city was around $120,000. That just came from additional labor and resources that were needed to recover those assets.
Yeah, so this is something, you know, that's happening all over the country and happens. We see a lot of such a high prevalence of attacks to SMBs because they don't always have all of the resources in-house that a larger enterprise customer might see. And the same thing for smaller local governments. So I think those examples just set us up for what we really wanted to share today and how we wanted to be able to say this is something happening. You all know that this is happening. That's why you're here today. And how can we help you protect yourself? So with that, let's move forward into talking about our security checklist. So the security checklist is something that we really wanted to create and give you all information on because you have probably somebody who handles your IT right now. And going into those conversations can be tricky if you don't know what's going on. You don't know the right questions, the right terminology, because I'll be honest, I am not an expert and I don't know all of that terminology. So it's great to have a list of these are the things that you really need to look for, and these are the questions you need to ask to make sure that you really are secure. So the first part of that, we're going to talk about infrastructure, endpoint, and compliance. Then moving into infrastructure, our first question was, what do I need to ask my IT provider to ensure I have an appropriate security infrastructure? And for our answer today, we're going to move to Spencer, our engineer. Spencer, can you talk through some of the things that we need to know about our IT infrastructure?
Yes, ma'am. So, you know, first off, firewall. Firewall is going to be your first layer of protection from your business to the outside world. You know, just for an example, what we're seeing out in the field a lot is going to these business locations. They'll have Comcast, Charter, Spectrum, AT&T, internet coming in, and then the company's just using the equipment provided by that internet provider for all of their internet usage. So there's no, you know, appliance or anything in place to prevent any kind of malicious activity coming in and out. You know, not having that firewall in place or an up-to-date firewall, as Pete was saying, can cause exactly what happened with those people in Michigan, or cause, you know, other issues that can go by undetected from time to time. Patch management. So patch management is going to be, which you guys have seen it before, Windows updates, software updates, you know, Outlook or Word updating. What those are going to be is those are pretty much patches being updated to your software, because the reason why they're pushing these out is because there's been vulnerabilities or flaws seen in previous versions of that software. So they're pushing out patches in order to mitigate those issues. So you want to always make sure everything you have is up to date to the latest version of everything. And there's software out there that can make sure that that's always in place. And then password management. So today, cyber thieves use software programs, as Pete was stating, which is called brute force. It can generate password combinations, thousands an hour, to gain personal information. You know, and roughly 65% of people use the same passwords for every site, every software that they use, which makes this even more riskier for businesses. So using best practices and having a, you know, detailed outline set of principles when creating or storing passwords can save a business a lot of money and possibly, you know, save the business from going out of business completely. Multi-factor authentication, which ties into that, is just a second layer of authentication before that company's software or information can be accessed. It can be used by, you know, getting a code generated sent to your phone, or using an app on your phone that generates a number every time you log in, which is a good deterrent for cyber thieves, as they see that, and it makes it a little harder for them to get in, and they tend to just move on to the next one, which is, you know, probably going to be easier than yours. So, you know, all of these solutions can, you know, provide a simple function for a good backbone and security on your infrastructure.
Awesome, thanks, Spencer. So moving into the next point that we wanted to talk about in the cybersecurity checklist is, what do I need to do to protect my computers in the office and remotely? And when we talk about endpoint, we are talking about computers. So Ben, can you jump in and let's go through what we need to know about protecting our endpoints and our computers for a business?
Sure, and this is really timely. I mean, this is a really extreme challenge right now with coronavirus, and you have employees that we provide a computer to, and I think there's an expectation that we're able to keep that computer secure. So that was hard enough in the office environment itself. You know, you do everything you can there. It becomes even more problematic as we move to the home. So I'm out there every day talking to our clients about different issues that they have, concerns that they have, and the ones that come up over and over and over again that I think we need to be talking about are really three. The first one is the difference between endpoint protection and antivirus, and this is kind of a biggie. The second one is how you're doing your backups. We always want to have a backup file for everything that we have, and I think there's a misconception of the different types of backups and what that actually gives you as a business owner in terms of business continuity and being able to get the business back up from either some type of cyber attack or an act of God. And then the last one is email. Constant frustration with customers on emails, losing emails, trying to do email audits and not being able to do it either with a hosted provider that's hosting your email or with Microsoft using a product like 365. So I'll just touch on these briefly. So let's start with this endpoint versus antivirus. So I'll tell you a little story. I walked into a client that had been hacked, had crypto locking done on several devices, and they were looking for ransomware. And I asked them, I said, do you have antivirus? And they said, yes, we do. And they said, Ben, we're concerned because we have antivirus. How did we get hacked? And that brings up a point that a lot of people just don't understand what's necessary to have good protection on these computers. Antivirus is only scanning for known threats, and those known threats may have existed for 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. In 2020, these hackers have gotten so sophisticated that they're doing real-time attacks with real-time malicious software that may be real-time. So antivirus is just simply not going to pick it up. The second thing is that we can't keep, and you as a business owner or an executive probably can't keep everyone in your organization from clicking on some type of malicious email or something that they might get, and that something might have a payload that's unknown to antivirus because it might be new or different. So that brings in endpoint protection. Endpoint protection has a couple of things. Number one, it creates safeguards on computers so that there can't be mass encryption events. We can't have a file that's going to write code that's going to do that mass encryption. And that's where the really bad stuff happens, because the first thing that a hacker is going to do is go after your backup so you don't have a way to restore, and that's what Peter was talking about earlier. And secondly, they're going to basically put a lock and key on all your files and ask you for a check to give you the key to unlock it. So what endpoint protection does is it does two things. Number one is it's using software that won't allow for those mass encryption events. And number two, it's using human elements that are watching for hacker-like activity, files being written on computers, things that shouldn't be happening on that device, and that happens during via monitoring, to ensure if that's seen, that gets blocked and stopped, so that we can potentially turn something that might have been a 3 or 4 week problem into something that might be a 3 or 4 minute problem. So we can talk more if you guys would like at a different time about this, but it's really something I see people thinking that they're protected with the antivirus. The second one is the backup. And we run into this all the time on with clients. And the biggest thing that we want to have you take away today is an understanding of the difference between a file backup and an image backup. So the first thing that you need to know is, if I've got a file-based backup and I have a compelling event, I've got someone who has cryptolocked me, I've got a piece of hardware that's gone down, I need to do a backup. The only thing I have is the application files. What I don't have is I don't have the operating system, I don't have the applications, and I don't have the time as a business owner to spend rebuilding that whole computer from scratch so that I can restore the file backup that I have. So the biggest threat that you have if you only have file-based backup is time. When I go into folks that have file-based backup that we're trying to help restore, you're dealing with typically weeks to get folks back up. And you can think of your own business or people that you advise for that have businesses of what a day's lost revenue means. I mean, in coronavirus, that was kind of brought home in a significant way, was that cash flow is everything. And so the amount of time that you're down is important. And it's important that if you do have some kind of event that you can bring it back up as quickly as possible. So image backup, which would be the preferred method, is basically a picture of that entire device, not only the files, but the operating system, all of the applications, the settings, and from a time perspective, you would be able to get back up and running with a new device in a matter of hours, potentially minutes, rather than having to wait for all the other stuff to get loaded and hope that happens in an organized manner. So that's something, if you wanted to, that's something you need to reach out to your internet provider, your current network provider. And if you don't have one, we can certainly help you with it and guide you there, is to ensure that you have a solid backup and that you have some kind of business continuity plan to be able to bring your business back up if something either happens to hardware or there's a compelling event in the business. So the last one, I believe, is the bane of everyone's existence, and that is email. It's a constant issue that we see out in our clients, and that is lost emails, the ability not to be able to do audit on emails. And what we're seeing is that folks buy a product and they may get it from CDW, or they might buy a computer that is included with, like, Office 365 that has an email platform. And what they don't understand is that Microsoft guarantees the availability of the platform. They don't guarantee the integrity of the data on the platform. So whether it be email, if you're using products like OneDrive, all of those don't have an automated backup for the Microsoft product. And if you have a hosted provider, you need to ensure that that host has a backup, that it is tested, and that you give them the business case to test it, so that you ensure that if you have a compelling event or you have an audit or you have a lost email, that you'll be able to find it in the future. So a cloud backup product, like we use a product called Dropsuite, would allow you to back up the entire Microsoft Office 365 environment, including email, in the cloud. That data is encrypted, so it protects that data from in transit and from intruders trying to get at it in the cloud environment. And it ensures that you never go offline, and it can be reached from anywhere that you have an internet connection. So again, that's something that you really need to take seriously, is some type of backup for your email. And if you have Office 365 and you're using OneDrive, we need to make sure that you've got a backup for that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. I think that gave us a good overview of what you need to do to protect those endpoints, those computers. Our next question is really about specific requirements. So are there specific requirements or risks based on my business industry that I need to be aware of? And we're going to have Todd join us for this answer. Hey, Todd.
All businesses are not the same, as everyone knows, and everybody has different compliances. And And over my years of experience, there are so many different compliancies out there right now for each type of business that it's almost there's too many to list. You know, the ones that we kind of have here on the screen are HIPAA, FINRA, legal, and then the GDP are just 4 of them. You know, you've got I deal mostly with HIPAA and FINRA and SOX mainly. You know, GLBA is another one that I come across occasionally during the course of a year. The GDP in Europe is a different, that was implemented in 2018. That's to protect any type of data that's being used over in Europe. We've had some clients over the past couple of years have asked us questions on how to help them with this. And some people don't understand that some of the vendors you might use over in Europe, or you've got another sister company that has data in Europe, that sometimes those companies can come back to the United States and you could be liable for being compliant with GDP. Let's go ahead and talk about, you know, there's the differences between, you know, some of the things that are different between HIPAA and PCI and SOX were the ones that I really focus on. The PCI is for anybody who processes credit cards. PCI compliance doesn't really take into consideration how your network is configured. Instead, it really falls under the jurisdiction of how you're protecting credit card user information. HIPAA is something that's very common in the medical community. It focuses on users' access to medical practice, to patient records, and includes things like, you know, checking to make sure that all users have a unique username and password for auditing purposes, and who can remotely access HIPAA compliant data. It also goes over how patient records are being moved from location to location. And it also goes through your penetration testing and vulnerability testing to make sure that nobody can get in that if you get that information that's not authorized. SOX is a little bit different compliancy where there's a large amount of paper trail and history because the company is required to process control it for data retention. A SOX audit is really comprehensive. It'll focus on how your data is entered, how it's stored, and how it's being retained. In the next slide, there are some basic things, no matter what compliancy that you're under, that we can talk about. The first one is you create a baseline of understanding what your network status prior to ensuring compliancy. If you are under some type of compliancy, you have to make sure that that you're doing what the compliancy is asking you to do, and ensuring that before you get into an audit situation, that you're halfway there, or at least 3/4 of the way there, in case you've got some things that are maybe, you know, that are maybe lacking in regards to what your compliancy requirements are. Lots of times, you know, there are amendments and updates to each one of these compliancies that you might not be aware of, that come out every quarter. And so they change things off and on depending on the technology. One of the most important things is number 2 is to make sure you have a good backup. It's very important to have your data moved off site. A lot of times we run into clients who are doing the correct backup scheme. They have the great policies, everything's written out, and their backups are located on an external drive inside their office. We've seen over the past year, we've seen the hackers actually getting access into their systems, and the first thing they do is they delete their backups. And so if they're off-site, that problem will be able to adhere itself, so that way that there's no way for them to delete those backups if they're not on your system itself. Encrypt data. I can't emphasize this enough. I probably had 4 or 5 instances over the past year where encryption has come in handy. For example, about 2 months ago, I have a law firm that that's one of our clients here in Indianapolis, and she called me about 7 o'clock on a Saturday night that she had gone to dinner, and the law firm itself deals with mortgage applications, so they have a lot of sensitive information. And somebody had broken the window in the back of her car and stolen her laptop off her back seat, and she was worried about the data that was on that laptop. And since her system was encrypted, I told her, I said, hey, I said, they can't get to your data. They've got your laptop, but the data's encrypted. They won't be able to break into it. Ensure passwords is number 4. It's to the point now where there are certain requirements where some compliances require that the users change them every 30 days, sometimes 90, sometimes 120. It just depends on the compliancy itself. 90 days is usually the standard, and they have to be complex enough that they'll pass the compliancy. Usually it's 8 to 12 characters, and you usually have to have a capital letter or some type of a symbol, or the $sign or an exclamation point, something that's going to make it typical for a hacker to get into it. Two-factor authentication. This was a big issue. It's been a big issue for a long time, but two-factor used to be very hard to implement. There really wasn't a lot of solutions out there for two-factor. As you can probably tell, all of us are using two-factor authentication with our banks or with any other type of some kind of a financial system. And so now it's getting to the point where it's mainstream, and it's actually easier and it's actually cheaper to install and to implement two-factor authentication. Number 6, maintain a security posture that minimizes the surface area by a hacker. So the thing is, if you make it easy for them, they will find a way. It doesn't make any difference how big or how small you are. Making sure that you make it as difficult as possible for them to get the data that they're looking for. Retain services of a skilled consultant on number 7. A lot of people have a small business. They rely on their IT provider. Sometimes there are companies out there that do this specifically as a business, and you need to rely on that person to give you the recommendations for you to make sure that you're compliant. And then number 8 is periodically test adherence to compliances and standards. So, once you've gone through some type of a compliancy audit, is to make sure that those things are being implemented, and you keep on implementing them throughout your company. If you're not under any type of compliancy, disaster recovery, document retention policies, your email policies, your IT systems use policies. I think every business needs to have that in place, just for yourself, and in case down the road that something goes wrong, at least you can give the person who's asking you for those policies to have those in place. Other than that, that's all I've got for you.
Thanks, Todd. I think that really wrapped up a lot of what we were talking about before as well. So like you said, a lot of this, some of it may be really specific to a certification or an industry, but it's pretty good general advice across the board. With that, we're going to move right ahead into our cyber attack section. So I know that this was a popular topic when we were putting out information about this. We have a great video. All of you are going to get a copy of this, and I'll be sure to include it. But we want to make sure that we have time to get to your questions. So we're going to go ahead and just move right past that one for now and move straight into our questions here. So the first question that we have is, if I have everything on the security checklist covered, do I still need to worry about cybersecurity? So Peter, I think you're going to handle this one for us.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, you still have a lot to worry about. One of the biggest problems is social attacks. Now with social attacks, it all comes down to education. There are so many different types of social engineering or social attacks that are out there. One of my favorite things to do is to sit down with the CEO and identify where his weak links in his company are. So I'll call up the front desk and I'll say, hi, my name is Pete Avery. I'm calling from Charter Communications. Just calling to check on your systems. We noticed you had some internet problems over the past couple of days. I just wanted to run some tests. Just wanted to let you know if you see your internet go out for a second, that's just me doing a test. I'll wait about 5 minutes and call the person back and say, yep, I did notice some problems on the line. Do you mind if I take a look at your network? Just go to this website and yep, go here, download this program, and I'll just need that password. And you'd be surprised how many people allow me right into their network. It's amazing. So there's a couple of specific types of attacks that are here. One is called a spear phishing attack. Generally, this is done with emails. So you'll see those emails that come through, and there'll be a place to click, and it'll ask for your username and password. It's from a malicious person trying to get that username and password so they can log on to your Office 365 or your accounting software through QuickBooks or your drive that's out there on Dropbox. And what they'll do with that information is they'll encrypt your data and hold you for ransom, whether it's on any of those platforms. Baiting is another interesting one. It's enticing you into something. So you've won a lottery, or you've won this, or you've got this inheritance coming. So they're gonna use that as a way to gain information, whether it's your checking account information, or usernames and passwords, or your social security number. It's a real easy way to get people tricked because they're excited about getting something. Quid pro quo, it's another way. It's basically you're doing something for someone in response for them doing something for you. And in that exchange, you're giving them information they can use either for identity theft or a way to exploit you in some other way. Pretexting is basically setting you up for a hack. So that's kind of what I did with that telephone call to that front desk person. I'm giving them leading information, gathering trust, making them feel comfortable with the exchange of information. And then tailgating is another real dangerous one. So generally that's coming, you'll have somebody that's authorized to do something within your network, and that tailgater will follow them in on that vulnerability in order to gain access. So it's all different types of social attacks, but these aren't all of them. And they're emerging more and more every day. So that's why it's important to continually educate your staff, because you're only as strong as your weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity.
Absolutely. We're going to move into this next question, which plays into that. This is one that we received from someone registered here on one of our attendees today. So it's, what can the average business owner do to prevent those attacks? And we're going to go back to Peter again for some answers and go through what these mean. But what you want to look for are 4 things, which are security risk assessment, password management, which I know you've heard from us before on this call, but it's that important, phishing recognition, so understanding what to look for, and employee training. So Peter, if I can ask you maybe to come back through and talk us through the main components that everybody needs to look for in those 4 areas.
Yep, that's security risk assessment. It gives you a basic understanding of how your network is laid out, how your policies and procedures are laid out, and do they meet the industry's minimum standards or whatever compliance that you have to make. It's very important that you get this because it gives you an idea of what you have right now from not only a firewall setting, but how you conduct business. Are your passwords the way they're supposed to be? Are those programs protecting your customers' information properly so only the right people are asking that? And SRA will, just like it says on the screen, will help you understand your risk for phishing, scams, and ransomware, dangers of lost mobile devices, the risk of insider threats. So if you have a malicious employee that's doing something that can hurt you or your customers, and how prepared you are in the event of a disaster. So it lays out exactly how prepared you are for all of these things. Password management is huge. So you want to make sure that it's at least 8 characters long. In some industries, just like Todd said, it needs to be 12 characters or longer. And consider using passphrases. When I say passphrases, it's not exactly a phrase. You want to use non-dictionary words to come up with that. So you want to come up with a clever way to remember your password without having those dictionary words. Don't reuse passwords, and adding a number to the end of an existing password or just changing your punctuation from an exclamation point to an @ symbol. That's still reusing passwords. You want it to be unique. And don't post it in plain sight. You'd be surprised at the number of offices I go into, walk up into the server room, lift up the keyboard, and there's all your passwords. You don't want that to happen. You want to protect those. Keep them protected. And when you talk about password complexity, it's important that it has uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, and then some sort of punctuation. And try not to use anything that's identifiable because somebody knows you personally. So like the last 4 of your social, or your child's names, or your child's birthday. Seeing all of those things entered in, and they're very easy ways to exploit you. MFA is probably one of the most powerful tools you can have, because MFA requires you to have another method of authentication. So it's going to use another device, whether it's your cell phone or something else, in order to prove that you are who you are. So cell phone, when it's shooting a text message to you that's constantly changing and you're posting that information back into your computer, perfect way to protect yourself.
So let me jump in on this multi-factor, because as we've gone to the remote workforce, and remote workforce was coming prior to Corona, but this is really, it accelerated it, is that we're seeing a lot more folks using VPNs to access their networks, using remote access tools like LogMeIn. It is critical that you implement a multi-factor authentication within those remote access environments, because if you get someone's user credentials compromised, you've got remote access from anywhere, frankly, in the world. So it's a really big thing, and if you don't have it today, it's something you need to be looking in if you have any kind of remote worker situation happening in the office.
Absolutely.
And I would say one thing, we see a lot of businesses are on a pause or seeing less business. I think, if I'm understanding correctly, hacking is a different industry. They don't stop when there's any kind of catastrophe. It's a boom in their business because they know that people are distracted, that there's new ways to use schemes and scams to use this kind of situation, not only remote workers, but you're getting a lot more email communications. You're using different tools than you used to. So I think this is especially timely when you're talking about that remote worker, because this is an opportunity for those malicious actors versus a consequence or a challenge for the rest of us.
And just to add one more thing on that, you also have more individuals that have access to devices in remote settings. If someone's standing up at Starbucks and walks away, if they're at home and one of their kids or their kid's friend has access to the device, that's another way to make sure that you get the right people in the right places, is to have that dual authentication.
Absolutely. That multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, if you think about it, those endpoints that people are using to connect back into their office, whether it's their child's laptop or that laptop that was sitting in a closet for years, you have to remember that's a point of entry. And the only way you can protect your office is if you have that extra protection of multi-factor authentication before you're allowed into that network. So phishing awareness, we have specific programs that are designed to help identify those phishing emails that are coming in. So I don't know if everybody has seen this, but the majority do. If you look up in that sender line, sometimes it looks like it's from somebody that you trust, but there's a slight variation in the spelling of the domain name, or it doesn't even match the domain name that should be there. It's pretending to be somebody else in order to get you to either click on something, send a wire transfer, do something that you don't want to do. And there's a ton of different variants that are out there. But that phishing protection, we have a product that we use that does a great job at that. So you want to talk to whoever your provider is about those third-party solutions that help combat those phishing emails. But most of all, if you're not expecting it and somebody's asking you to do something or click, call the person on the phone and verify before you send money, or you click on that link and put in your password. It's very important. So this is my favorite. It's employee security training. You need to have a structured cybersecurity training for all of your employees. Just like I called that person at the front desk, that was their weakest link, but your weakest link could also be the maintenance guy. It could be just about anybody in your organization. So you want your entire organization to be able to go through that training program. And as a business owner, I was a business owner too. I was just as dangerous as just as any of my other employees. So make sure that you go through that and you take it to heart. So you want to be able to spot those phishing emails that we talked about, dangers of email attachments, cost of hacking, the dangers of hacking, because employees don't understand that those hackers aren't just going to hurt the business owner, they're going to hurt their way of life. You don't want to have to lay them off because you don't have a business anymore. Causes of data breaches like hacking and stolen devices, security in social media, and doing the right things in social media so that you're not hurting your business or exposing yourself. And then you want those continual reminders. You want tests. You want them to prove that they know what they've learned through the structured training. And because cybersecurity or cyber criminals are developing new ways to exploit people on a daily basis, and there's always something new on the horizon, you want to make sure that you're keeping up on the latest and greatest with new information and new training sessions as much as you can.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I think that's great and just such a good reminder. So again, you'll get a copy of this. These are things that may seem easy or little, but it's so important to remember those simple things and to be able to encourage your employees to do the same, because I think what we've seen is you can have everything in place on that security checklist and still have that point of vulnerability being that human component that we can all make mistakes and we don't know that we might be endangering our company and our jobs as well. We're going to move over quickly to secure communications. We got a lot of questions about Zoom. So Sean Reed, you're going to be covering that for us. And then we're going to move into our questions, which we've got a few questions already here on the board and some that were submitted. So if you pay attention to what Sean's got to cover, but also feel free to go ahead and send some questions in because we'll be moving to that next. So Sean, I hear a lot in the news about issues with virtual meetings being hacked. Should I use them?
Yeah, that seems a really popular topic nowadays. I'm just going to kind of run through these just to keep us back on track here on time. So the first thing to do is to properly train your users on your chosen platforms. End user training is key for all software solutions. You'd want to treat this just as you would your primary billing system or CRM software. You wouldn't want an novice user from here just making changes on their own. Make sure to set rules and policies in place that dictate how and when different communication solutions should be used. Make sure that we're using the right products and solutions that we're getting with customers and the coworkers, and that we're securing those down properly. If the options available, always enable a password on your meetings and webinars. Open meetings are easy to guess with most platforms. They just use a standardized sequence of numbers to identify sessions. Enabling a password gives you more control over your meetings and added protection against malicious attendees. If your platform has the feature, make sure that you lock the meeting once all parties have joined. That'll prevent anyone from popping in there and disrupting your meeting. Also, disabling screen sharing for attendees. Limit the screen sharing options to only the host of the meeting. If other parties need to be sharing some content, add them as co-hosts. That'll limit the disruptions there as well. Make sure not to share invites openly on social media and your website. Now, we all want to keep the customers in the loop, but sharing online meetings on social media is just leaving you open to attacks. Those invites and those registration pages can be found very easily using some online tools that use scrape data from your websites. If you are going to post something up there, make sure to use a registration process. That'll give you an option to go through and vet those attendees before you share the credentials to join those sessions as well. Make sure that your meeting recordings are being handled safely and securely. If you're recording meetings locally or to the cloud, make sure those files are being stored in a place that is not open to the public. That's been another one making the news pretty heavily here recently. And if possible, sign up for the paid service if you're currently using the free solutions. Most platforms include additional features and controls in their paid service, allowing you to enforce security policies and default settings across all meetings in your organization. And lastly, make sure that you or someone on your team is monitoring the news for any recent exploits, hacks, or breaches of the services that you use, and keep your end users educated on those threats and the mitigation techniques as they're made available.
Thanks so much, Sean. So, you know, Sean has been on top of this for our organization. He's helped us set up calls and make sure, and it may take a couple of extra steps, but none of them have hindered the great things about that virtual communication. So this is a great list to hold on to. We'll be sharing some more information on that. If you've got specific questions about it, you can go ahead and submit them now, or you can contact us and let us know, and we'd be happy to help answer that question as well if you come across something new. So we're going to move into the questions that we've got here, and I know most of us are good to stay on, so we're going to try to get to every question. If we don't get to any, we'll be sure to respond after we have one of our experts reach out. But we may run a little bit late, so a little bit past 2 o'clock. So if you want to stay on while we go through these, please feel free to, and we're going to start moving through these now. So first question we have here is from Hillary. So would a firewall or server be recommended for a small clinic setting? What are the benefits for each? You can get somebody on the panel to jump on and help Hillary out with that.
So definitely a firewall would be a good first step in protecting that perimeter of your network in a small clinic. As far as a server goes, it would depend on what type of applications that you run within your clinic, what's your intent to do. So it'd be a good idea to have an expert come in and take a look at how you're planning to use that server internally. And then you have to think about, if you have a physical server there on site, you also have to protect that server to make sure people aren't getting the information off of it. So I'd say for sure, a firewall is a must. You have to have that for a clinic. The server's questionable. You might decide that a cloud-based server would be a better choice. And especially with today's pandemic and how it's affected so many people, especially in other verticals, you have to think about, you have to get that access to that data from many places. So it's a lot easier sometimes to have a cloud-based solution for a server or than a on-premise one.
Awesome, thank you. Hopefully that answered your question there. Our next one from Shelly, do we need a VPN? If so, what do you recommend and what is the cost?
So I know Shelly personally. Hello, Shelly Smith. If you're out there, Shelly's a CPA, and I think Shelly is asking about remote access. And so, Spencer, if you want to take that one from a standpoint of how they might do remote access if they're doing it today, he may be concerned that the way they're doing it is not secure. So if you want to speak to that.
Yes, if you guys are using a VPN today, you want to make sure everything in regards to what service that VPN is running on. Is it running on your firewall? Or are you using LogMeIn? Things of that nature. There's certain questions you want to ask depending on how you're going about accessing your data from remote locations. Just as Pete was talking about, if you are using a VPN, you want to make sure you're definitely using multi-factor authentication. Because like I said, if your credentials are ever compromised, they still have that second layer that they have to get through before they can get to any data or access any data at all, regardless if it's on-premise or in the cloud. Most definitely would like to have a conversation with you about it.
And and just as another reminder, that goes back to patch management, because if you're using a firewall to manage that VPN connection and you're not updating it, that's going to be the first thing that a hacker knows, is those known vulnerabilities to be able to try to enter that way. So you just need to kind of understand what the maintenance of that would look like going forward so you protect yourself. Thanks for that question, Shelley.
Our next one comes from Michael. I think this is a really timely and geographically for us, important question, which is, I have employees who work remotely, but they live in rural areas with little access to decent internet service. Please discuss some options. So when you have someone who's working remotely where there isn't that same internet provider as maybe in a bigger city, what can you do to be able to make sure that's a good working situation?
So it is a challenge, especially in rural areas, to get a good, solid internet connection. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of options, especially if you're very rural. Satellite is one. There's several. Viasat is one brand of satellite provider that brings internet to you. There's also some wireless solutions that are out there depending on what your community is. Spencer, you know the market a little bit better than I do. In rural areas, what are some good solutions for people out there to get a solid internet connection?
There are a few decent satellite providers. There's also some good cellular providers, Verizon being one of them in this area. And I know Michael, and I know kind of the areas he's speaking on. That's definitely something we could look into is, maybe working with Verizon to see what we can get. We can always test it out before, any commitments are made. Unfortunately,
when you go into those types of providers, there are some limitations. VoIP especially is the biggest limitation. As you decrease the quality of your internet signal, you're going to decrease the quality of those phone calls that are going back and forth. So be very conscious of that as you're making those choices.
If you're looking at a voice over IP, telephone solution, those kind of things, and you have remote workers, those kind of factors are going to be important in the discussion with your IT provider.
Yeah, but Sean, what were you jumping in with too?
Yeah, sorry to talk over there, Ben. I would recommend also reaching out to the local municipality and see if there are any known WISP operators in the area. WISP is a wireless ISP. They will generally take a strong connection that is available outside of the territory, and using wireless repeaters are able to branch that further out into more rural areas. So I would check with your local city office and see if anyone is known to operate in the area.
Awesome. I hope that helps, Michael, and anybody else who's dealing with that same challenge. We've just got a couple more if anybody wants to hang on. And again, we will be following up with you and sending you this presentation with even more detailed information after those calls. So you'll be sure to get that information if you've got to get back to your day. We have a question, and XMC, as you know, is an office technology provider. So Jeff looks like reached out to ask if he can centrally manage the security settings for their Xerox machines on their network. And I think that's an important reminder too, that it's not just that endpoint, but having that fully secure area. So not just Xerox, but for copiers and printers. What do people need to know? And is there anything with that remote capability that they need to understand about using other devices as well at this time?
So I'll take that one, and this is not going to be a great answer. The short answer is, Jeff, call us, because the answer is complicated and it depends on specifically what you're trying to secure. Just a larger point is that the Xerox devices are like an iPhone or an Android in that they run apps and different applications, and an application might be a better way to handle what Jeff's trying to do, or some of the internal intelligence that Xerox has built into it. So the short answer is call us, ask for our help desk, and we can certainly walk them through. But we definitely have fleet management tools that are available for large fleets, like he's describing.
Thanks, Ben. And we'll go to, I think this is going to be our last one. We did answer quite a few of these. I incorporated into the presentation. So thank you again for everyone who submitted questions. This one, and Sean, I don't want to put you on the spot or anybody on the spot, but somebody asked, how do we ensure good security during Zoom or other virtual meetings? Which I think you really walked us through, and I recommend just keeping that information Sean put there. Let us know if you need more specifics. But is Zoom a secure platform? Should we use other platforms? Are there other options that people should start exploring? We're actually using a Zoom webinar product today, Lisa, so I can tell you that, we've had to take some measures there. But Sean, are there other meeting platforms that you've seen have issues, or do you feel that there's a way to be able to lock down across those different brands?
There's a lot of other platforms out there that are available, and we're seeing a lot against Zoom because it's the one that just gained the most overnight popularity. Anytime that new software is adopted across the board, you're going to see a lot of attacks and exploits against that solution. A lot of folks they're not educated on the products. They're very easy to be tricked into clicking on things. So all of them are going to have their inherent issues. It just depends on the level of visibility they have in the environment at that time. Like Holly said, we're still using Zoom. We have no plans to stop using Zoom. Just make sure that you're researching and leveraging all the security options that the provider gives to you and how to properly put those in place.
Awesome. And so we'll submit all of this information, those questions. We answered a couple through chat as well, so we appreciate that. I think that we're going to go ahead and just wrap up here. I know everybody's got to get back to their day, and thanks so much for spending some time with us today, for putting the care that you have into your business, which is really obvious just by you being here. And a big thank you to our panel. That's the reason why we were able to give you this great information. So after today's call, you're going to receive an email with a copy of the presentation, and I'll have some additional details about topics so we can make sure we're getting all that information we spoke to in a format that you can use and share. We'll include a form as well in that email. So if you have an additional question or you need to have a conversation with us, you can let us know, and we'll be able to follow back up with you and get one of our experts in touch to find out what we can do for that. And we'll also follow up with anyone who's questioned, if there was anything that we saw that came through, not on the chat, but via email, we'll be sure to follow up and make sure that we can answer that as well. So thank you for spending an hour of your time with us today. Thank you so much for caring about this topic and for being a local business, as most of you are, because I think we all see the impact of having you all there. And so we're going to go ahead and end today's webinar, and we'll be reaching out for more great opportunities like this to get some additional education from our experts. So thank you all. Stay safe and stay healthy out there, and we appreciate your time today.